Has there been a more wide open Grand Slam in recent memory than this French Open? Favorites are either battling injuries or just severely out of form. Those who are supposed to be next up are under-delivering. The consistent ones are doing their thing, but are they really capable of winning the big one? I guess we will figure that out in the next 2 weeks, but for now, I as a tennis connoisseur will present to you the definitive ranking tier list before Roland Garros. So these are the tiers. Flop is a tier for those who will under-deliver. Polar Bear in Texas is a tier for those who'd rather be anywhere else than at these clay courts in Paris. Teams Enemies tier is easy to understand, just a statistic is for those who'll exit the tournament in the first or the second round. Old Guard tier is for those who are just too old to compete for the title, but I respect them too much, so I won't put them in the same tier with some bum players. Dark Horse tier is for a player or players who will produce a surprisingly deep run in the tournament. Mid is mid, but this time around being mid is not that bad. And then top 8 tier and the Le Champion tier is obviously the most important one. So let's not waste any more time and let's get into the tier list. And the first tier that I'll fill up is the one that is just a statistic. As I can see, Altmaier is a statistic, Atmane is a statistic, Andy Murray in the Old Guard tier because he's basically almost the reason why I made this tier. Sebastian Baez is good on clay, but I don't see him being a real contender, so I don't know, he'll be mid. What the fuck is he doing here? I guess he's just a statistic, but I don't know, I just don't get how can anyone care about Roberto Bautista Agut. I have nothing against Nuno Borges, but I feel like he'll just be a statistic as well in this tournament. Sasha Bublik will go to the mid tier. He'll probably say that he doesn't care about the tournament and then still try and then lose, and everyone will say like, oh, what if Sasha Bublik tried? Well, that would be the best player in the world, but in reality he's just a solid player at best. Pedro Cachin is probably going to ask for a jersey swap with someone, so he's just a statistic for now. Same for Carballes Baena. And now we've come to one of the favorites in the tournament, and it's Carlos Alcaraz. He's obviously not going to flop even though he was injured. He's not enemy to team, he's not a statistic, he's not old, he's not a dark horse, he's not mid, but I don't think he will be a champion this year, so I'll put him into the top 8 tier. And after Alcaraz, to ruin it all, we have Pablo Carreño Busta, and just put him in the statistic tier, fuck him. Koboli, statistic. Correa, statistic. This guy, statistic. Who's that even? It's Darderi, statistic. Davidovich Fokina is mid. De Minaur, mid. Or maybe even a flop. I mean, nobody is expecting a great result from De Minaur, but I guess in comparison to his ranking, I think he will flop in the earlier stages of the tournament. Grigor Dimitrov is someone who has been playing well as of late, but I just don't see him doing anything special at this French Open, so let's put him into the mid tier. Jere is just a statistic. Draper, I feel like putting him into the flop tier. I guess again, not many are expecting for him to like go to the top 8, but I think people are overrating his abilities, especially in Grand Slam tennis, so he'll flop. Echeverry will be mid because yeah, he's a good clay court player, similarly to Baez, but I don't think he has that it factor to do anything more at the tournament. And now we have the first Polar Bear in Texas, Christopher Eubanks. Thank you for your entry at the French Open. Dan Evans, I don't know, just a statistic. I mean, he's a fighter, but his recent form has been god awful, so I don't see him doing anything. Nishikori goes into the Old Guard tier because again, I just respect him too much to put him into the tier with players like Carballes Baena. If there was a tier for people who suffer from Napoleon complex, Corentin Moutet would go in there, but even though he's not a wild card for this tournament, I'll put him into the team's enemies tier. The next up is my boy Holger Rune, and he's definitely going into the top 8, and I thought to myself that I'll put 8 players right now into the top 8, and then at the end of the video I'll decide who I feel will win the championship at the French Open. Felix Auger-Aliassime is going into the mid tier because obviously he's not good enough to be in the top 8, but even though he can produce some great results, I don't think he'll do enough to be considered a dark horse this year. Fabio Fognini goes into the old guard tier because, again, I respect him too much. And now we have the first dark horse of the tournament because I feel like Artur Fils will do something special this year. Maybe he won't win a title, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him into semi-finals or even the finals of this French Open. He will have the crowd behind him, he has immense talent, and I'm sure that he can produce something special. Taylor Fritz has a difficult matchup in the first round against Correa, and I feel like he will be one of those highly seeded players who will lose in the first round this year. Gaston is a statistic, Vucevic statistic, Gasquet old guard, Giron statistic, Goffin statistic, who even is that? Ah, it's Hoffman statistic, Pierre Hugh Herbert is going into the team's enemies tier. Rinky Hijikata is polar bear in Texas, to be honest. Unfortunately, is going into the mid tier. Hubi is just going to be mid as well. Who even is that? Galan statistic. Jerry, I feel like he will be where he'll be in the dark horse or top 8. I guess if he is in the top 8, then it will be a surprisingly good run. But let's put him into the dark horse tier, even though I guess he was at the Masters final just a week ago. But still, I don't think many are expecting a great result from Nicolas. Kupfer is just a statistic. Miomir Kecmanovic mid. Let's go with mid. Kachanov, I mean, he somehow, some way finds a way to be in the top 8 or in the top 16 of the tournament, but will he do it this time around? Let's go for mid. Tanasi Kokinakis is just a statistic. Korda, I guess in relatively to his ranking, he could be a flop. But actually I put him into mid tier. I think he'll at least win 2 matches in the tournament. Kotov, just fuck off and you're a statistic. Mikkelsen, polar bear in Texas. Kwon is polar bear in Texas, I feel like. Dusan Lajovic mid. Constant Lestian, even though again he's not a wild card, he is team's enemy from now on. Lorenzo Musetti mid. Marozsan mid. Mahach mid, or just a statistic. Let's go for mid. Manarino enemy. Marterer, why is he even here? Pedro Martinez the same. Arnaldi, I mean, he's good for a young player, but mid. Harold Mayotte is team's enemy. McDonald is a polar bear in Texas. And Daniil Medvedev, is he going into the top 8? Is he? No, he's not, because he is a flop. Not because he's a bad player, but I feel like he won't have the pressure of like repeating a result from last year, because last year he lost in the first round. He is injured, at least there have been some concerns, so I feel like he will lose in the early stages of the tournament. Jakub Menchik is playing Casper Ruud in the first round of the tournament, so unfortunately he will be just a statistic. Is it Mikkelsen? Yeah, Mikkelsen is polar bear in Texas. I guess I have 2 photos of Kecmanovic, so he's so mid that he will feature in this tier 2 times. Is it Moreno de Alboran? If it is, then he is team's enemy. Giovanni Pecci Pericard is also team's enemy. Jaume Munar statistic, even though he is a solid player on clay, but just fuck him, I hate his grunts. Sumit Nagal statistic. And now we have Rafael Nadal, and he is just losing in the first round against Sasha Zverev, right? Let's not lie to ourselves. So without being disrespectful, let's just put him into the old guard tier. Brandon Nakashima is a polar bear in Texas. Luca Nardi statistic. Navone, he is one of those guys that who could produce a nice run, but I don't know, it's his first Grand Slam ever, so I feel like even putting him in mid tier is too generous, but let's go for it. Yoshi Nishioka is polar bear in Texas. Cam Norrie mid, and now we have Novak Djokovic. You could say that he will flop, and I wouldn't disagree with you, because his form as of late has been pretty bad, and I don't feel like he will be mid. I'll put him into the top 8, but I think we could change some things up in the future. Christopher O'Connell is a polar bear again. Sebastian Ofner is statistic. Tommy Paul might be a rogue shout, but let's go for top 8. I feel a top 8 in his repertoire. Then it's Max Purcell, polar bear in Texas. Alexei Papirin, yeah, he'll lose in the first round. Artur Rinderknecht, he's team's enemy, even though again he's not a wild card. Vukic, polar bear in Texas. Rublev is top 8. Ruud, the same. Rusuori mid, Safiulin mid, Wild is mid, but I hope he will be just a statistic because I hope he loses to Gael Monfils in the first round. Shapovalov just a statistic. Ben Shelton, I guess he will probably advance the first 2 rounds, but nothing much else. Shevchenko, just fuck off, you're a flop, I hate you. Jannik Sinner, we have 6 already in the top 8. Yeah, you're going in the top 8. Sonego, just a statistic. Wawrinka, old guard. Stefanos Tsitsipas is in the top 8. Struff is mid, but he's not mid. He's great, but unfortunately for this tier list, he is mid. The same goes for Francis Tiafoe. My heart hurts to put him in the mid tier, but have to be objective. Talon Grigspor is, again, mid. Taro Daniil is just a statistic. Gael Monfils goes into the old guard tier, and I can't wait to watch him play at the French Open. I just reminisce of his last year's match against Sebastian Baez, and I hope he can deliver the same this time around. Artur Cazaux is just a statistic. Jordan Thompson, polar bear in Texas. That's definitely a guy. Tiranch. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but yeah, he's going into statistic tier. Wanash the same. Botic van de Zandschulp is going into the same tier. Adam Walton is a team's enemy. Zhizhen Zheng is going into the statistic tier, or nah, he's mid. Let's put him into the mid tier. Alexander Müller is going into statistic tier, and now we have a problem. We already have a top 8, but I feel like Sasha Zverev will be here, so I have to think for a bit and eliminate someone from this top 8. You know what? After careful consideration, I feel like Jannik Sinner will actually flop this year. The same way he did last year, but this time around he'll have an excuse that he was injured. So the top 8 is Carlos Alcaraz, Holger Rune, Novak Djokovic, Tommy Paul, Andrey Rublev, Casper Ruud, Stefanos Tsitsipas and Sasha Zverev, and now I have to decide who will be le champion. And I'm going to be honest, I didn't think for long, as this year is the year for Holger Rune, and he will raise the Grand Slam trophy in Paris, and there is nothing anyone can do about it. So this is my beautiful French Open tier list. I'll put the link in the description and in the comment section down below for you to complete this tier list as well. And if you want to share it with me on Twitter at pure_LVP. But with that being said, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and until next time, take it easy.